The commander's voice crackled through the radio like a whip. Level it! Every structure! Leave nothing standing! Colonel Yusuf Draken didn't wait for confirmation. He was already pointing at the ridge, his finger stabbing the frozen air with the casual authority of a man who had never once questioned whether he had the right to erase people from the earth. 80 infantry, 31 armored vehicles. One small American base standing between him and a clean tactical corridor through the Rockies. He smiled. He had done this before. He would do it again. If this story moves you, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The temperature at Firebase Keller had dropped to negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit by the time Sergeant First Class Mark Callahan finished his third cup of coffee that tasted like motor oil and broken promises. He stood at the eastern wall of the forward operating base, a collection of prefabricated panels, sandbags, concertina wire, and frozen prayers, and stared out at the white expanse of the Colorado Rockies like a man reading his own obituary. He knew the numbers. He had known them for 6 days. 31 armored vehicles, 80 enemy infantry, one enemy commander who had already flattened 2 smaller outposts in the past 3 weeks without losing a single man of his own. And on Callahan's side, 10 soldiers. One generator that coughed and sputtered every time the wind shifted. No close air support. No reinforcements incoming for at least 72 hours. Command had been honest about that at least. Brutal honesty was the only currency that still had value out here. Sergeant! Corporal Danny Reyes appeared at his elbow, his breath fogging in the brutal cold, his face red and raw. Generators at 60%. Martinez thinks it drops below 40, we lose the thermal monitors. Callahan didn't turn around. Martinez thinks a lot of things. He's usually right. Yeah. Callahan finally looked away from the ridge. He is. Tell him to do what he can. Reyes hesitated. That hesitation told Callahan everything there was something else. Something the kid didn't want to say. What is it, Reyes? The resupply truck. Reyes pulled out a folded paper, which was absurd given that they had digital tablets, but paper didn't run out of battery power in negative 22. It came in last night, hour after midnight. We got ammo, some medical supplies, 2 crates of MREs. He paused. And a person. Callahan finally turned to face him fully. A person. A soldier, private, E2. She signed in as Emily Carter, medical MOS. Reyes handed him the paper. She had orders, legit orders, but Sergeant, she came in with a case, long black locked, like rifle case long, and she wouldn't give it up at the checkpoint. Said it was personal medical equipment. Personal medical equipment. That's what she said. Callahan stared at the paper. Emily Carter, private first class, age 19, 2 years of service. Medical MOS 68W. Orders stamped, signed, authenticated. Everything in order. Everything completely, perfectly in order. Which was exactly what bothered him. Nobody sent a 19-year-old medic to a forward operating base that was 10 hours from being overrun. Nobody sent anyone to Firebase Keller right now unless they had absolutely nowhere else to send them or unless they had a very specific reason. Where is she now? The East bunk room. She hasn't spoken to anyone. Ate her MRE alone in the corner facing the wall. Facing the wall. Facing the wall, Sergeant, like she was thinking, or like she didn't want anyone behind her. Callahan folded the paper and put it in his chest pocket. Get me Martinez and tell Carter I want to see her. Martinez was a broad-shouldered 26-year-old from El Paso who had joined the Army because his older brother dared him to and had stayed because it turned out he was exceptionally good at keeping broken machinery alive through sheer force of personality. He met Callahan in the generator room, which was warm by comparison to the rest of the base, warm meaning -8, and wiped his hands on a rag that was already black with grease. She's not going to Mega the night, Martinez said, nodding at the generator. He always referred to the generator as she. It was one of his quirks that nobody questioned anymore. I've rerouted the secondary circuit, I've bypassed the thermal regulator, I've done everything except pray, and I'm not ruling that out. How long, Mom? If the storm picks up 6 hours, if it stays steady, Martinez shrugged. 8, maybe 10. What do we lose first if she goes thermals, then communications array, then heating in the bunk rooms, though those will retain warmth for a while, he paused. Then you're choosing between lights and the radio. Callahan absorbed this the way he absorbed all bad news silently, in layers the way cold seeps into bone. He had been in the Army for 14 years. He had been in tight spots before. But tight spots usually had exits, even ugly ones. This one felt different. This one felt like a room with the walls moving inward. Do what you can, he said, which was what he always said, and Martinez always did. Emily Carter was sitting on the edge of a cot when Callahan found her in the bunk room, and his first thought, the honest one before the professional one, was that she looked young. Not just 19 young, younger. The kind of young where your face still has the last remnants of childhood in it, a softness around the jaw, a clarity in the eyes that hard experience hasn't clouded yet. His second thought was that she had placed the black case under the cot at an angle where she could reach it with one hand without leaning over, and that placement was not accidental. "Private Carter," he said. She stood immediately, straight, clean, the kind of attention stance that told you a soldier had been trained well. "Sergeant Callahan," she said. Her voice was quiet, not soft quiet. There's a difference. Soft means uncertain. Quiet means deliberate. "Sit down." He pulled a folding chair from against the wall and sat across from her. "Tell me about your orders." "Forward medical support, Sergeant. Firebase Keller, 72-hour assignment, pending resupply rotation." "Who sent you?" "The orders are stamped by Colonel." "I read the orders." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm asking who sent you specifically." Something moved across her face, not discomfort, not guilt. Something more like the expression of a person deciding how much of a truth to give you. He had seen that expression before, but never on someone so young. "My unit," she said, and then nothing else. Callahan let the silence sit. In his experience, silence was one of the most effective interrogation tools that never got taught in any classroom. Most people couldn't stand it. They filled it. They said things they didn't mean to say, just to end the discomfort. Emily Carter sat in the silence like she'd been born in it. "The case," he said finally. "Medical equipment, Sergeant. Open it." Again, that fractional pause. Not fear, not defiance. Calculation. "I'd rather not, Sergeant." It's calibrated equipment and the temperature difference from Carter. His voice didn't rise, but it settled, became heavier. "Open the case." She held his eyes for exactly 2 seconds, he counted, and then she reached under the cot. The latches clicked in a specific sequence, not the standard left to right. She knew those latches the way you know the exact pressure needed to open a door in your childhood home. By feel, by habit, by 10,000 repetitions. She opened the lid facing away from him. Initially, then turned it. Callahan had been in the Army for 14 years. He knew weapons. He knew equipment. He recognized what he was looking at. He just took a moment, a real unguarded moment, to process what it meant. Inside the case, nested in precision-cut foam, was a long-range precision rifle. Not standard issue. Not anything close to standard issue. The kind of platform that carried a price tag the Army usually attached to very specialized operators. There were also tools, a compact weather kit, a rangefinder that cost more than his truck, a logbook small, worn its spine cracked from heavy use. He looked up at her. 2 years of service, he said. "Yes, Sergeant." "You're 19. "Yes, Sergeant." "And that is a rifle that—" He stopped. He started again. "Where did you learn?" This time the pause was different, longer. And something in her face changed in a way he couldn't quite categorize, not sadness, exactly not pride either. Something more private than either. "My father," she said, "and then I got better than him." Callahan sat back. The generator hummed its labored, threatening hum in the distance. Outside, the wind was picking up again, throwing ice crystals against the walls with a sound like static. "How much better?" he asked. She looked at him steadily. "Far enough that it matters, Sergeant." He called a briefing, all 10 of them. The cramped operations room smelled like wet gear, cold metal, and the particular anxiety sweat that soldiers produce when they know the math doesn't work in their favor. He laid it out straight. He always laid it out straight. "Column is moving. 31 armored vehicles, 80 infantry. Estimated ETA to our position is between 14 and 18 hours depending on weather and terrain. We have no air support, no reinforcements for 72 hours minimum. We have 10 personnel, limited ammunition, and a generator that Martinez tells me has the survival instincts of a mayfly." "Thanks for that," Martinez muttered. "Our options are limited." Callahan looked around the room. Evacuation is not viable. The storm has closed the secondary road, and the primary is in the enemy's projected path. We hold, or we hold, said Corporal James Weston flatly. He was 31, the oldest among them, after Callahan, a quiet man from rural Georgia, who had the deliberate solidity of someone who had never in his life made a panicked decision. That's the only thing on the table. Agreed, said Private Thomas Park. The others nodded. Nobody was surprised. Callahan nodded too. Then we get smart. Weston, I want thermal decoys set up on the north and east perimeters. Make them think we have more heat signatures than we do. Park, I need every bit of wire and obstacle material we have staged along the approach roads. Not to stop them, to slow them. Slow is what we need. What about her, said Specialist Rita Okafor. She said it without meanness. Okafor didn't have mean in her, but she said it with the directness of someone who needed information to function. Her eyes moved to Emily Carter, who was standing at the back of the room, back against the wall the way she'd been in the bunk room, watching everything with those quiet eyes. What does the new medic do? Callahan paused. He had been thinking about this since the bunk room, since he'd seen what was in that case, since he'd heard her say far enough that it matters with that particular stillness. Right now, he said, Private Carter assists with medical prep. She makes sure we're ready to treat casualties. He looked at her as he said it, and she looked back at him, and there was a conversation in that look that had no words. He was giving her space. He was not yet showing his hand. Anything else she does is her business until she wants to make it ours. Carter gave a single slow nod. Okafor looked between them. Okay, she said in the tone of someone who knew she was not getting the full story, but trusted the person who was withholding it. The briefing broke. Soldiers moved to their positions with the practiced, heavy efficiency of people who are afraid but channeling it correctly. Fear, Callahan had always believed, it was not the enemy of courage, paralysis was. Fear properly directed made you faster. It sharpened your attention. It made you care about every detail. He found Carter 2 hours later at the eastern wall, her back to the base, looking out at the mountain ridge in the dark. The storm had built further. Visibility was down to maybe 40 meters. The wind tore across the open ground with a malice that felt personal. She had a small notebook in her gloved hands. She was writing. What are you doing? And he asked. Calculating, she said without looking up. Calculating what? Wind drift at 800 meters, temperature coefficient, density altitude. She turned a page. The storm is going to shift direction in about 2 hours. The barometric pressures have been dropping at a specific rate. When it shifts, I'll have a window. He stared at her profile. The wind yanked at her hair. She wrote another line. Carter, he said, if you're what I think you are, I'm a medic sergeant. And then softer, barely audible under the wind. And other things. Other things, he repeated. I've been observing the approach terrain since I arrived. She finally looked up at him. In the dark, her eyes caught what little light there was and held it. I've been calculating since I arrived. 8 days of satellite data my previous unit gave me before I deployed here. I know where they're going to turn the funnel. I know where the low ground is. I know what the wind does coming off that southern face. She tapped her notebook, and I know how far I can reach. He was quiet for a long moment. The generator coughed in the distance, and several of them stopped breathing for a second until it caught again. How far, he said. She looked back out at the ridge. Far enough, she said again, and this time the words had weight he could feel. Give me a position, Sergeant. Give me time, and I'll give you hours. He should have said no. He knew protocol. He knew what his order said. He knew that a 19-year-old private, regardless of what was in her locked black case, was not supposed to operate independently outside the wire in a hostile combat environment with zero backup and a storm bearing down like judgment. He knew all of it. Get some sleep, and he said, 2 hours. She closed her notebook. I sleep 4 hours a week during active situations, Sergeant. I already had my 4. He looked at her for a long moment. Then stay warm, he said. You're going to need it. He walked back toward the base. He did not look back, but he heard the scratch of her pencil against paper, heard her murmur something under her breath that might have been wind speed numbers or might have been something else entirely. The generator kept coughing. The storm kept building. And somewhere, out in the white dark, 31 armored vehicles were moving through the mountains, and their commander was pointing at a ridge, and he was smiling the smile of a man who did not know that someone was already calculating the exact geometry of his mistake. Inside, Weston found Callahan by the operations board. Weston was a man of very few unnecessary words, which was one of the things Callahan valued most about him. "The girl," Weston said. "What about her? She's not just a medic." "No, and she's good." Callahan thought about the equipment in the case. He thought about 8 days of satellite data, and the way she'd said far enough both times like it was a specific answer to a specific question she'd been asked before. He thought about a 19-year-old standing at the wall in a 22 below windstorm with a notebook calculating barometric pressure. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. Weston was quiet for a moment. "What's your gut say?" Callahan looked at the operations board, the red markers showing the enemy column's projected path, 10 blue markers showing his people, the math that didn't work. "My gut says," he said slowly, "that we might be standing next to something we don't have a word for yet." Weston absorbed this in his quiet Georgian way, nodded once. "Then I hope she gets some rest." "She says she doesn't need it." Weston almost smiled. "Even better." At 02:30, the storm shifted direction exactly the way Carter had said it would. Reyes noticed first he was on watch, and he almost called out to Callahan before he realized something else, something that stopped his breath. Private Emily Carter was gone. Her bunk was empty. The black case was gone. Her cold weather gear was gone. She had left her medical bag neatly positioned beside the bunk. Everything organized, everything accessible. She had even left a single page torn from her notebook on top of it. Reyes picked it up, read it, brought it to Callahan immediately. Callahan read it twice. It said in small, clean handwriting, "Elevation acquired. Radio frequency 143.275. Non-standard. Keep thermal monitors running on North Quadrant. I'll be there before they are." Carter Callahan stood in the bunk room holding that piece of paper, and for the first time in 6 days of knowing the impossible math, he felt something other than dread. He couldn't name it right away. He would later when he had time to think. It was something very close to hope. He went to the radio. He tuned to 143.275, which was not in any standard frequency list for this region, which meant Carter had either chosen it to avoid interception or had been told to use it by people who thought that way professionally. Static. Then a burst of wind noise. Then her voice calm and clear and completely steady. "Base, this is Carter. I'm in position. Maintain your thermals on the North Quadrant. Don't turn on any exterior lights, regardless of what you hear. Confirm." Callahan keyed the radio. "Confirmed, Carter. We hear you." A pause, the wind, the hum of the struggling generator. "They're moving," she said. "Column is approximately 11 kilometers out. Lead vehicle is a command variant. I can see the antenna array. I'm calculating now." "Carter," he kept his voice level. "What's your plan?" Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice had the detached precision of someone who was already in their mind somewhere else entirely. Somewhere small and cold, and still looking at the world through glass, calculating. "To give you time, Sergeant," she said. "That's always been the plan." The radio clicked off. Outside, the storm howled across the frozen Rockies like something ancient and indifferent. Inside Firebase Keller, 10 soldiers who had spent 6 days staring at impossible math looked at each other and waited. And on a ridge that nobody had designated, in a position that nobody had assigned in cold, that would have stopped most people from thinking clearly enough to function. Private Emily Carter lay still in the white dark, her notebook closed, her calculations complete, her breathing slow and even and perfectly controlled. The column was moving. She was already there. 03:17 hours. Callahan hadn't slept. He wasn't going to sleep. He sat in front of the thermal monitor with his elbows on his knees and his coffee going cold beside him, watching the green-gray shapes of his team moving through their positions like ghosts in a machine. Weston at the north wall. Reyes running wire on the eastern approach. Martinez doing something to the generator that involved language Callahan chose not to process. Everyone moving, everyone working, everyone afraid, and doing it anyway, which was the only definition of courage that had ever made sense to him. The radio on 143.275 was silent. It had been silent for 41 minutes. "She check in?" Reyes asked, coming back through the interior door. with ice crystals on his eyelashes and the hollow-eyed look of a man who had been outside in -22 for too long. No. You think she's... Don't finish that sentence, Callahan said, not harshly, just firmly, because he couldn't afford to have that sentence finished. Not yet. Reyes dropped into the chair beside him and looked at the thermal monitor. Columns still moving, he said, reading the faint signatures at the edge of sensor range. Slow but moving. Storm's giving them trouble too. Not enough trouble. No, Callahan agreed. Not enough. He picked up his cold coffee, took a sip, set it back down. He thought about what Carter had written. I'll be there before they are. He thought about the way she'd said far enough twice both times with that specific weight like it was a measurement she'd taken and was certain of. He thought about a 19-year-old in ghillie gear lying in the snow, somewhere on a ridge in a storm in the dark alone, with nothing between her and 31 armored vehicles except distance and preparation in whatever it was that lived inside her that he still didn't have the right word for. He thought about her father. I learned from my father, and then I got better than him. He hadn't asked what happened to the father. He wished he had. The radio crackled. Every person in the operations room went still. It was the particular stillness of people who have been waiting so long that the thing they've been waiting for almost doesn't feel real when it arrives. Base, Carter's voice, steady, controlled, slightly lower than before, which meant she was in a position where she was managing her breath volume. I have eyes on the column. Lead vehicle, confirmed command variant. I count 31 total. Their pace has slowed. The storm is pushing their visibility down. They're running thermals, but their equipment is older generation. I can see the degradation in their sweep pattern. Callahan pressed the radio. Carter, you good? A brief pause. Define good, Sergeant. He almost smiled. Operational. Operational, she confirmed. I need you to do something in exactly 9 minutes. Not 8, not 10, 9. Tell me. I need Martinez to cut primary power for exactly 4 seconds and restore it. Full cut, full restore, nothing in between. Callahan looked at Martinez, who had materialized silently in the doorway, already listening. Martinez raised an eyebrow. Reason? Callahan asked into the radio. Their thermal sweep is on a cycle, Carter said. Every 9 minutes, they run a wide arc scan of the surrounding terrain from their lead sensor vehicle. If your base shows a power fluctuation at the right moment, it reads as a generator fault routine non-threatening. It pulls their sensor operator's attention to you as a technical blip rather than a tactical target. They'll log it and move on. A pause. And while their attention is on that blip, their scan won't capture what I'm about to do. The room was completely silent. Martinez was already moving toward the generator room. Callahan keyed the radio. 9 minutes, Carter. 8 minutes, 50 seconds now, she said. I'm already counting. The radio clicked off. Reyes turned and looked at Callahan with an expression that combined awed disbelief and a very specific kind of military respect that you only gave to people who had just demonstrated they were operating on a level you hadn't previously considered possible. She's been watching their sensor cycles, Reyes said. Yes. From out there, in that storm. For how long, Callahan thought about what she'd said the night before. 8 days of satellite data. He thought about the notebook, the calculations, the barometric pressure, the wind drift. 8 days of information compiled before she'd even arrived, and then whatever she'd gathered in the hours since she'd gone outside the wire. Long enough, he said, and he heard his own voice use those words and understood suddenly with a cold clarity why she used them. Because some things didn't have a better answer. Some depths didn't have a bottom that was useful to describe. 0326 hours, 9 minutes gone. Martinez cut the power. 4 seconds of darkness. The thermal monitor went black. The radio went silent. Someone in the room held their breath. Callahan heard it, a single held breath, and he didn't know whose it was, and it didn't matter. 4 seconds. The generator coughed back to life. The monitor flickered and reestablished. Nothing happened. And then the radio. Base, Carter's voice, and something in it, something small, almost imperceptible that might have been satisfaction. First shot is away. Callahan grabbed the radio. Say again, Carter. I said first shot is away. Now watch their lead vehicle. He turned to the thermal monitor. The column was at the edge of their sensor range, barely visible, heat signatures smeared by distance and weather. He watched. He leaned forward. He watched. The lead vehicle stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Full stop, immediate, like something had interrupted it at the molecular level. What did she, Reyes started. Quiet, Callahan said. On the thermal monitor, the shapes behind the lead vehicle began reacting. Vehicles pulling up short. Infantry signatures, clustering, dispersing, clustering again. The specific visual language of an organized column suddenly losing its organization. He had seen this before, but from the air, from drone feeds, from the comfortable distance of a forward operating base with air support and reinforcements and all the things he didn't currently have. He had never seen it produced by a single person. Base, Carter again. Their commander just stepped out of the command vehicle. He's on the ground trying to get eyes on a threat that he cannot locate. His infantry is spreading to the flanks, which is what I need them to do. They're going toward the eastern low ground. The low ground is the rough terrain, Callahan said. The ravine system. Yes, Carter said. It's going to slow their flanking vehicles by a factor of 3. It's also going to separate their armor from their infantry. When armor and infantry separate in this terrain, at this temperature, they start making individual decisions instead of collective ones. Another pause. Individual decisions are easier to manage. Okafor, who had come to stand behind Callahan without him noticing, said very quietly, "She's not just shooting, she's hurting them." Callahan didn't respond because there was nothing to add to that. It was exactly right. Carter wasn't trying to destroy the column. She was redirecting it. She was using one shot, one single round from a position they couldn't identify to push 31 vehicles and 80 infantry into terrain of her choosing on a timeline of her design. The radio crackled again. "Sergeant, I need your team to activate the thermal decoys on the north perimeter in 30 seconds. All of them simultaneously, not sequentially." "Weston," Callahan called. Weston was already at the north wall controls. "Ready?" 30 seconds, Callahan said. "On my mark." He counted. He watched the monitor. He watched the enemy column's infantry continuing to spread east toward the ravine exactly where Carter had said they would go. Mark. Weston hit the controls. All 6 thermal decoys on the north perimeter activated simultaneously, 6 heat signatures blooming on any enemy thermal system as 6 human-sized targets moving on the northern face of the base. On the monitor, the enemy reaction was immediate. Infantry signatures that had been moving east began turning, pausing. The column's command element, Callahan could identify it by the cluster of signatures around the stopped lead vehicle, was now getting information from 2 directions. Threat from an unknown position to the north. Heat signatures on the firebase's north face. A commander who had been smiling 10 hours ago was now standing in negative 22-degree cold, trying to reconcile inputs that didn't fit the intelligence picture he'd walked in with. "Perfect," Carter said over the radio, and the word was quiet and clinical and entirely without vanity. She wasn't congratulating herself. She was noting a successful calculation. Callahan pressed the radio. "Carter, what was the first shot?" A pause. "Their lead vehicle has an antenna array for coordinated communications." Had. "You took out their comms relay." "Part of it," she said. "The primary antenna is down. They're on backup frequency now, shorter range, more interference in this weather. Their column-wide communication is degraded. Units at the rear of the column are getting every 3rd transmission, if that." Reyes had his hand over his mouth. He removed it to say, "She took out their comms with 1 shot." "Sergeant?" Carter's voice again. And now there was something different in it. Not urgency exactly, but a heightened focus, the kind that comes when a situation is moving faster than the pace you plan for. "Their commander is smart. He's already ordered his 2nd vehicle to move up and reestablish the antenna link. I have maybe 4 minutes before their communications are partially restored. I need to take the next shot before that happens." "What's the next target?" Callahan asked. "Their forward sensor array, the vehicle 3rd from the front left side. It's carrying their primary ground scanning equipment. If that goes dark, they're flying blind at the front of the column. They'll slow to a crawl because their commander isn't going to push 30 vehicles through mountain terrain without ground scan capability. What do you need from us?" "Nothing," she said. "Just hold your positions. Don't turn on any exterior lights. And tell Martinez." A brief pause, and in the pause, he heard it, the slight adjustment in her breathing that meant she was doing something physical. shifting position, settling, finding stillness. Tell Martinez the generator sounds like it's running rough on the secondary bypass. If he opens the east-facing exhaust port, it'll reduce the thermal signature by about 15%. It'll be harder to differentiate from ambient rock temperature on their sensors. Callahan turned and looked at where Martinez should have been. Martinez was already gone. He'd heard it on the radio and was already moving. Okafor leaned close to Callahan and said in a voice too low for anyone else, "How old did you say she was?" 19, he said. Okafor made a sound that wasn't quite a word. It was the sound of a person completely revising their understanding of something they thought they knew. 0341 hours. The second shot. Nobody heard it. That was the thing that was hardest to explain afterward, when there was time to explain things. They didn't hear a shot. What they saw was the thermal monitor, and what the thermal monitor showed was the sensor vehicle on the left side of the column going abruptly cold. Not dramatically, not explosively. The heat signature of the vehicle's sensor array simply changed, reduced, distorted, and then the behavioral change in the column was immediate and readable, even through the noise of thermal imaging at long distance. The column stopped. Not one vehicle. The whole column. The kind of full stop that comes from a commander sending an emergency hold order, which meant the commander knew something had happened to his sensor vehicle, which meant he was now operating with degraded comms and degraded sensor capability in a mountain environment in a storm. And whoever was out there doing this was still invisible, still unlocated, still beyond anything his column had been briefed to expect. Base. Carter's voice. Still controlled. Still quiet. But beneath it, beneath the control and the quiet, Callahan heard something. Something that took him a moment to identify. She was cold. Not panicked, not suffering, but genuinely deeply cold. The kind of cold that tightened everything, that made your words come out fractionally slower even when your mind was still running fast. Column is holding. Their commander is on the ground. I can see him from here. He's on a handheld unit trying to reach his rear elements. The rear elements can't hear him clearly. How far are you from the lead vehicle, Carter? A pause. Far enough, Sergeant. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have authorization to give, she said, and there was something in that authorization that told him things about who had sent her and why that he filed away for later. What I can tell you is that their commander is now aware he has a precision threat that he cannot locate, cannot communicate about effectively to his full column, and cannot scan for with his front sensor array. He's going to make one of two decisions in the next 6 to 8 minutes. What are the two decisions? He pulls back to regroup and restore communications, she said. Or he pushes forward fast, trying to overwhelm the position with speed before I can take more shots. Callahan's jaw tightened. Which one does he pick? That, Carter said, depends on what kind of commander he is, and I've been watching him for 8 days. A pause that was exactly 1 second long, and in that second, Callahan didn't breathe. He's aggressive. He doesn't pull back. He's never pulled back in his operational history. He's going to push. Then what do we do? You don't do anything yet, she said. Ishao. I do, and then you'll have a decision to make, and I need you to trust it when I give it to you. Callahan pressed the radio button and held it without speaking for a moment. Then Carter, you've been out there for how long? Long enough, she said, and this time the phrase carried something else. Something personal. Something that told him she knew he was asking not as a commander checking an asset, but as a person checking a person. And she was acknowledging it. And she was telling him in the only vocabulary she seemed to have for this kind of thing, that she was still there, still functioning, still in it. Copy, he said. We trust you. Do what you need to do. The radio clicked off. Weston appeared at Callahan's shoulder. He had been so quiet that Callahan had genuinely forgotten he was in the room. She's been out there in that storm for almost 2 hours, he said. Yes. In full ghillie gear. In the dark. At distance. Yes. Calculating all of this before she even left. 8 days before she left, Callahan said. Weston was quiet for a moment, processing this with his particular Georgian deliberateness. Then he said, who trained her? The Army doesn't produce this. Callahan thought about the worn logbook in the case. The cracked spine, 10,000 repetitions. He thought about her father. Someone exceptional, he said, And then she exceeded them, 0354 hours. The column moved, not in retreat, forward, faster than the terrain should have allowed, which told Callahan that the commander had made exactly the decision Carter predicted and had made it faster than she'd given him credit for. The thermal monitor suddenly lit up with movement, armored signatures, pushing forward infantry, trying to keep pace, the whole mass of it lurching toward Firebase Keller with a sudden aggressive momentum that made Callahan's stomach drop, even though he had known it was coming. "He's moving," Reyes said, and his voice was tight. "I see it. He's moving fast." "I see it, Reyes." The radio exploded. "Base, he's pushing, faster than projected. I need your thermal decoys repositioned to the south face. Immediately, I need Martinez to cut power for 2 seconds and 30 seconds, and I need everyone away from the eastern wall." "Away from the eastern wall," Callahan shot back. "Carter, that's our primary defensive position." "Away from the eastern wall, Sergeant. Please." And the "please," that single word, hit him differently than any tactical command could have. Because she didn't say please when she was operating. She said it when she needed him to trust her without having time to explain why. And she knew that please was the fastest way to communicate that this was not a suggestion. "Everyone off the east wall," Callahan said, raising his voice. "Now, move." There was a half second of confused hesitation from his team, the natural human friction of being told to leave a position you're defending, and then they moved because Callahan's voice carried the kind of command authority that didn't leave room for the hesitation to grow. "Martinez," Callahan said into the radio. 2-second cut now. The power dropped. 2 seconds. Restored. And then, not from anywhere inside the base, not from any direction Callahan could track, the sound reached them. Not loud. The wind swallowed most of it. But he felt it the way you feel the concussion of something large and distant, a pressure, a change in the air. On the thermal monitor, the column's lead element, the command vehicle that had pushed forward, went sideways. Not destroyed, not a fireball, but sideways physically, its track blown, its momentum ended, a 30-ton vehicle suddenly diagonal across a mountain road in the dark, and the storm blocking every vehicle behind it in a perfect, geometric, catastrophic cork. The column was stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. "Carter," Callahan said into the radio, and his voice was not steady because he was a human being, and what he had just watched was not something that fit into the categories he had previously assigned to what one person could do. "Carter, confirm." "Base." Her voice. Still controlled. Still breathing correctly. Still there, seeing. "Their lead vehicle has a blown track and is blocking the primary approach. Secondary route is the eastern ravine, the one I sent their infantry toward 20 minutes ago. They're already in rough terrain, and they're going to take 40 minutes minimum to reposition. You have a window." A pause. "Use it." Callahan looked at his team. 10 people. 10 faces looking back at him with a mixture of emotions that he would spend a long time afterward trying to describe and never quite succeeding. There was relief in those faces, yes. But there was also something else, something that happened to soldiers when they witnessed a level of skill that recalibrated their understanding of what was possible. Not awe exactly. Closer to a kind of reverence that they didn't have vocabulary for and weren't sure was appropriate and felt anyway. "Reyes," he said, "get the obstacles on the secondary approach. Move everything we staged. Every barrier, every wire line, every piece of material. I want that ravine approach looking like the mouth of hell." "On it," Reyes said, and was already moving. "Weston, I need those decoys repositioned in the next 12 minutes. South face and west face alternating pattern. Make it look like we have a rotation going." "Done," Weston said. "Okafor." She was already looking at him. "Medical prep. Whatever Carter set up, supplemented. We may still take fire before this is over." "Already started," Okafor said and turned. He was left alone for a moment with the radio, and he looked at it, and he pressed the button. "Carter." "Sergeant, are you injured?" A pause that was slightly too long. "Negative? Are you cold?" Another pause. Shorter this time, but real. "Sergeant, I've been cold since I got here." "Don't worry about the cold." "I'm not worrying about the cold," he said. "I'm worrying about you." The radio was silent for 3 full seconds. In those 3 seconds, he had the feeling, irrational, unverifiable, that something on the other end of that frequency had shifted. Something personal. Something that 18 months of operational isolation had maybe sealed off and that those words had found a way through. "I'm operational," she said. Her voice was perfectly level. "I have 2 more phases to execute. Stay on frequency." "Copy," he said. "We're here." The radio clicked off. Martinez appeared at the doorway, wiping his hands on the black rag. He looked at Callahan with the expression of a man who had just watched something redefine his professional benchmarks. "She told me about the exhaust port," he said. "She was right. 15% reduction, exactly. I measured it." "Of course she was right," Callahan said. Martinez was quiet for a moment. "How did she know that about my generator, about my specific bypass configuration?" Callahan looked at him. 8 days of satellite data, Martinez. Martinez stared. "She analyzed our generator output from satellite imagery, or something like it." Another moment of silence. The generator ran behind Martinez, steadier now than it had been, its rhythm slightly different, with the exhaust port adjustment but holding. Holding with a stubbornness that almost felt personal, the way Martinez had always believed it was. "She's something else," Martinez said. "Yes," Callahan said. "She is." Outside, the storm screamed across the Rockies. The column was stalled. The ravine was filling with infantry moving through rough terrain in the dark. A 19-year-old in a ghillie suit lay somewhere on a ridge that nobody had assigned her, still and patient and cold, and already calculating the next phase of something she had been calculating for 8 days before any of them knew she was coming. And in Firebase Keller, 10 soldiers who had spent 6 days staring at math that didn't work had just watched one person quietly, methodically begin to change the equation. Nobody said anything about it. There wasn't language ready yet. There was just the work, the obstacles, the decoys, the medical prep, the generator, and underneath it, in every movement, in every face, the same thing. The same wordless, bone-deep understanding. They were not alone on this ridge. They had never been alone on this ridge. She had been there before any of them knew to look. 0412 hours. The column had been stopped for 18 minutes, and that was 18 minutes more than anyone inside Firebase Keller had expected to have when the sun went down the previous evening. But Callahan wasn't celebrating. He had been in uniform long enough to know that a stopped enemy was not a defeated enemy. A stopped enemy was an enemy that was thinking, and a thinking enemy given enough time would find the answer. He watched the thermal monitor with the focused stillness of a man who had stopped blinking. The signatures on the screen were doing exactly what Carter had predicted, reorganizing, shifting the mass of the column, spreading and contracting as its commander tried to solve a problem he'd never been briefed to expect. But they were still out there. All of them. 31 vehicles, 80 infantry, and a commander who had never in his operational history pulled back. The radio clicked on. "Base." Carter's voice had changed slightly. Still controlled, still deliberate, but there was a compression to it now. A density like someone who had been still for a very long time and was now operating at a sustained level of intensity that the body can only maintain for so long before it starts to borrow from reserves. "I need a status on the eastern obstacles." "Reyes has everything staged," Callahan said. "Ravine approach is as bad as we can make it in the time we had." "Good. Their infantry is about 40% through the ravine now. They're going slower than projected. The terrain is worse than their maps showed. That buys us an additional window." A pause. "But their commander has done something I didn't fully anticipate." Callahan sat forward. "What?" "He split his armor. He took 8 vehicles off the primary column and sent them south along the secondary ridge. They're not in my direct line. They're looking for a flanking approach from the southwest corner." Weston was already at the map before Callahan could speak. He put his finger on the southwest corner and looked back at Callahan with an expression that said what both of them were thinking. The southwest corner was the one face of Firebase Keller that had the least obstacle coverage. They'd staged everything east. The south decoys were running. The west face had concertina wire in 2 fixed positions. But 8 armored vehicles coming from the southwest with no sensor array and degraded comms and an aggressive commander who was done being patient, that was a different problem than the one they'd been solving. "Carter," Callahan said, "can you reach the southwest element?" "Negative," she said, and the word landed flat and hard. "My position was optimized for the primary approach. The southern ridge blocks direct line of sight to the southwest track. I can reach the column's center mass, I can reach the primary approach, but I cannot reach those 8 vehicles from where I am. Can you reposition? A pause that was precisely 4 seconds long. And in those 4 seconds, Callahan did the same thing he always did when math got ugly. He broke it into pieces. 8 armored vehicles. Southwest approach. How long? What angle? What options? Repositioning would take 12 minutes minimum, Carter said, and it would expose me during movement. Their commander is running backscatter surveillance now. He doesn't have his primary sensor vehicle anymore, but he's using the passive receivers on his remaining armor. If I move across open ground, there's a chance I register. Another pause. A small chance, but in this situation, small chances matter. So we have 8 vehicles coming from the southwest that you can't reach, Callahan said, and he said it flat the way he said all bad news, because saying it clearly was the first step to solving it. Correct, Carter said, which is why I need you to solve the southwest problem while I solve everything else. With 10 people and limited ammunition. With 10 people, limited ammunition, and the fact that those 8 vehicles don't know how undermanned you are. Her voice was steady. Sergeant, their commander split his armor because he thinks you have a significant defensive force. He's trying to find your flank. He's not charging the southwest, he's probing it. He wants you to show him where your people are. Callahan understood immediately. So we don't show him. You show him nothing, she said. You make noise without presence. You make him think the southwest is covered without putting anyone there who can actually be hit. A brief pause. I know you know how to do this. I've seen your team work for 2 hours. They're good. Something about the way she said it, direct, matter of fact, without sentiment, but also without performance, made Callahan feel the weight of it. She'd been watching his team from that ridge. In between calculations, in between shots in the cold and the dark, she had been paying attention to the 10 people she was protecting. Copy, he said. We'll handle the southwest, you handle everything else. Already am, she said and clicked off. He turned to Weston. Southwest approach. I need noise heat signatures and the impression of a covered position. Nothing real, nothing that commits personnel to an exposed. Give me 4 minutes, Weston said, and was already moving toward the supply room where they kept the remainder of the decoy equipment. Martinez appeared from the generator room, which was becoming his permanent residence. He looked at Callahan with the expression of a man about to deliver news that has an asterisk on it. Generator is holding, he said, but I'm seeing a load spike every time we run the thermal decoys on multiple faces simultaneously. If we add southwest signatures to what we're already running north and south, how much margin do we have? Maybe 30 minutes of full multi-face operation before I start seeing stress on the secondary bypass. Then we have 30 minutes to solve the southwest problem permanently, Callahan said. After that, we consolidate to priority faces only. Martinez nodded and disappeared. He had learned over the past 2 hours that there was no point saying things like, "That's not a lot of time," or "Are you sure about that?" Those words had no operational value. What had value was going back to the generator and doing the thing. 0428 hours. Weston had 4 thermal emitters positioned along the southwest perimeter wall in 3 minutes and 50 seconds, which was 10 seconds faster than he'd said, because Weston had built his reputation on never being late and occasionally being faster than possible. The emitters threw up 6 human-sized heat signatures in a spread pattern that suggested a rotating watch position. Not a crowd, not a static line, but the organic, irregular pattern of soldiers who were cold and moving around to stay warm. It looked real because Weston had watched real soldiers do it for 11 years. "How's that look?" he called from the southwest corner. Reyes checked the external monitor that showed their own thermal output from a spoofed overhead angle. "Like 6 very cold and very convincing people," he said. "Good enough." The radio crackled. "Base, their southwest element has paused." Carter's voice cut through the static with that particular clarity she maintained, regardless of what was happening around her. "Lead vehicle in the southwest group just stopped. I can see them running a passive scan." A pause. "They're reading your southwest signatures. Their lead is reporting back to the command element." Another pause. "Reporting confirmed contact on southwest face. Their commander just pulled 2 of the 8 vehicles back toward the primary approach." Callahan closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. 6 fake people had just convinced an enemy commander to reduce his flanking force. Weston's four emitters had just changed the math on the southwest approach from 8 vehicles to 6. It wasn't solved, but it was smaller. Carter, what does that do to their overall positioning? It tells me their commander is confused, she said, which is the best thing he can be right now. He has degraded comms, one sensor vehicle down a block primary approach infantry in difficult terrain, a southwest probe that's reporting unexpected resistance, and a threat he cannot locate or identify. He is operating on zero accurate information and maximum uncertainty. A pause, which means he's about to do something emotional. Emotional how? Callahan asked. He's going to try to reestablish control by doing the one thing he knows how to do better than anything else, she said. He's going to order an artillery prep on your position. The room went completely still. It was the kind of still that happens when a word lands in a space and takes up all the air. Their column has artillery capability, Reyes said, his voice slightly higher than normal. 2 self-propelled units at the rear of the column, Carter said. I've been watching them since I established position. I didn't target them in the first phase because artillery at this range in this storm has significant dispersion. He'd be firing area suppression, not precision. He'd be trying to make you keep your heads down, not actually destroy the base. It would be loud and scary and mostly miss. Another pause. Mostly, Callahan repeated. The more important thing, Carter said, and her voice shifted slightly, not in tone, but in weight, the way a voice shifts when someone is about to say something they have been building toward for a long time, is that if he orders artillery prep, he has to have his forward observer designate the target. And to designate the target, his forward observer has to establish a clear line of communications with his artillery element. And to establish that communication, they have to use their backup frequency at elevated power. A pause of exactly 2 seconds. And when they use elevated power on a non-standard frequency in a high-noise electromagnetic environment, they emit a locatable signal. Callahan put both hands flat on the table and leaned forward. You can locate their forward observer from the signal. I already have it, she said. I've been waiting for him to boost power. He just did. He's in the tree line at bearing 274 from your position, approximately 600 meters from the rear of the column. A pause. I can remove him from the equation before he completes the fire mission, which will delay artillery prep by at minimum 20 minutes while they reestablish a qualified observer. 20 minutes in this situation is significant, Sergeant. Take the shot, Callahan said without hesitation. I'm taking it now, she said, and the radio clicked off before he finished the sentence. 30 seconds of silence. The generator hummed. Someone Reyes Callahan thought was breathing audibly the way people breathe when they're trying not to hold their breath and failing. The radio came back. Forward observer is down. Non-lethal eye targeted at his equipment. He's alive. Their artillery element is waiting for a fire mission that isn't coming. A pause. For now. Reyes made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Okafor, who had come to stand in the doorway again with a trauma kit in her hands that she'd been quietly preparing for the past 40 minutes, put one hand on the door frame and leaned against it like she needed the support. Non-lethal, Weston said quietly from across the room. He wasn't questioning it. He was noting it. There was a difference. She's not trying to kill them, Martinez said, who had come back from the generator room without anyone noticing. He was looking at the radio with an expression that was difficult to categorize. Every shot she's taken comms relay sensor array, track on the command vehicle, now the observer's equipment. She's not trying to kill people. She's trying to make them stop. The room was quiet with that. It sat differently than other silences. It had a texture to it, something moral and precise and deliberate that matched the woman on the ridge in a way that made the soldiers in that room think about things they didn't usually have time to think about in the middle of a firefight. That's harder, Weston said finally. Killing is simpler. Disabling without killing requires twice the precision. Nobody answered because there was no answer needed. It was true, and they all knew it, and the knowing of it settled into them the way knowledge settles when it's about something that matters. 0447 hours. The radio came alive again, and this time Carter's voice had something new in it, something tight, something that was not quite alarm, but was the register immediately adjacent to it, the professional's version of an elevated threat signal. Base, I have a problem. Callahan grabbed the radio. Talk to me. Their commander has deployed a scout element. 4 infantry equipped with thermal detection gear, handheld units. Not vehicle mounted, but functional at range in this temperature. They're moving north of the primary column on the high ground. They're looking for me. A pause. They've narrowed my general area to approximately a 400-meter radius. They don't have my exact position yet, but in this terrain, at this temperature, a 400-meter radius becomes a 50-meter radius fairly quickly if they're methodical. How long do you have before they locate you? 20 minutes, she said. Maybe less if their lead scout is good. And their lead scout is good. I've been watching his movement patterns for the last hour. He reads terrain correctly. He's not guessing. He's eliminating. Another pause, and in this pause, Callahan heard something he hadn't heard from her before: the quality of a person running two simultaneous calculations and not quite having enough capacity for both. I need to relocate without compromising my operational position. And I need to do it while maintaining pressure on the column, because if I go quiet for more than 7 minutes, their commander is going to read the silence as an opportunity and push. Can you relocate and maintain coverage? There's a secondary position I identified 8 days ago, she said. It's interior, I mean inside the wire. It's not optimal for distance, but it covers the primary approach in the southwest track from a different angle. The range is shorter, the shot geometry is less favorable. But I can operate from there without being located by the scout element, because the scout element isn't going to sweep inside the firebase perimeter. Callahan understood before she said the next part. I need to come back in, she said, without the scouts seeing me move. How do you do that if they're watching your area? I don't move from my current position, she said. I move from their expectation of my position. I've been deliberately leaving minimal thermal sign. I'm running cold body temperature suppressed as much as physically possible, but position shielded by the rock formation I'm using. They don't know exactly where I am. They know approximately where I am. If I move in the opposite direction from where they're sweeping and use the storm's thermal noise to mask my movement. She stopped. I have a 70% probability of making it back inside the wire unseen. 70%, Callahan said. Yes. What's the other 30%? A pause. The other 30% is a problem, she said, and left it there, which was honest, and which he respected, and which also made his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with tactics. What do you need from us? In exactly 4 minutes, I need Martinez to run the generator at maximum load for 30 seconds. Full draw. It'll spike your thermal output significantly. The whole base will bloom on their thermal sensors. It'll pull the scouts' attention toward the base and away from the terrain between my position and the wire. And during that 30 seconds, I move, she said, fast. I'll be at the eastern wall secondary access in 5 minutes from your power spike. Have someone ready to open it without lights. No lights, no noise. I'll knock 3 times, 2 fast, 1 slow. Confirm. Confirmed, Callahan said. Martinez. He didn't need to say anything else. Martinez was already moving. Sergeant, her voice. One more thing. Carter. The column is going to move during the transition, she said. The moment I go quiet, their commander is going to feel the pressure lift, and he's going to push his primary approach. Their lead elements will advance. They'll hit the ravine obstacles Reyes staged, which will slow them, but they'll be moving. When I get inside and establish the secondary position, I need your team to be ready to execute a specific sequence on my direction. No improvisation, no independent action. Exactly what I tell you when I tell you. Can you guarantee that? Callahan looked around the room. At Weston, steady and deliberate. At Reyes, young and quick, and more capable than he knew. At Martinez, who kept everything alive through sheer will. At Okafor, who had been preparing for casualties with quiet, competent hands all morning. At the others, positioned cold, tired, afraid, and doing their jobs. I can guarantee it, he said. Then I'll see you in 5 minutes, she said. Keep the light off. The radio went silent. 4 minutes later, Martinez hit maximum load on the generator. The whole base shuddered. The thermal monitors flickered. The lights browned down and surged back. Somewhere in the dark outside, a 19-year-old in a ghillie suit crossed open ground in a storm, while 4 trained scouts looked in the wrong direction, drawn by the bloom of heat from the base they were trying to destroy. 3 knocks on the eastern wall access. 2 fast, 1 slow. Reyes opened it without lights. Emily Carter came through the door. She was coated in ice. Her ghillie suit had snow packed into every seam. Her face was so cold it had passed through red and gone a kind of pale that made Okafor take 1 step toward her before Carter held up one hand, A single precise gesture that meant, "Stop, I'm operational. Don't treat me like a casualty." And Okafor stopped because the hand was steady and sure, and it meant what it said. Carter had the case. She had the notebook. She had the rangefinder and the weather kit and every piece of equipment she'd left with. She hadn't left anything on the ridge because she hadn't left anything on the ridge by accident in her life. She looked at Callahan. He looked at her. There were about 10 things he wanted to say, and he said none of them because she was already moving past him, past Reyes, toward the eastern observation window that was the only point inside the base with an adequate angle on the primary approach in the southwest track. She had already identified it. She was already unlatching the case. "How long before they realize I've relocated?" she said, not stopping, not looking back. "Their scouts will sweep your old position in about 6 minutes, Callahan said, following her. "When they find it empty, they'll report to the commander that the sniper has moved," she said, dropping to a knee beside the window, hands moving over her equipment with a precision that required no visual attention. She was doing it by feel in the dark while she talked. "He'll have a 30-second moment of uncertainty about whether I'm still active. I need to resolve that uncertainty for him before he decides I'm gone and pushes everything." She looked up at Callahan. "In 30 seconds, I'm going to take a shot that tells him I am very much still here. And I need your whole team in position for what happens after that shot, because what happens after it is going to be the defining moment of this morning." Callahan held her eyes. They were sharp and clear and very tired in a way she was managing so completely that you only saw it if you looked directly and knew what to look for. He looked directly, he knew what to look for. "Tell me what you need," he said. She told him. It took 90 seconds, and in those 90 seconds she laid out a sequence of coordinated actions. Obstacles, decoys, radio procedures, timing, that was so precisely interlocked, so thoroughly pre-calculated, that the only way it could have been designed was by someone who had been imagining this exact moment for 8 days. Every person in the room a specific role, every action a specific window, every window a backup if it closed early. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Weston said very quietly, "That's the whole plan." "That's the whole plan," Carter confirmed. "You had this ready before you left the ridge." "I had this ready before I got on the truck to come here," she said. Another silence. The generator hummed. The storm pressed against every wall. "All right," Callahan said. "Everyone knows their role." On Carter's signal, he looked around the room one more time at his 10 people, at their faces, at the specific courage of people who are afraid and ready at the same time. Then he looked at Carter, settled at the window, her breathing already slowing, already finding the rhythm of a person who was somewhere else in their mind, somewhere still and cold and perfectly calculated. "Do what you do," he said. She was already looking through the glass. "Already am," she said. And the storm outside didn't stop. And the column didn't stop. And 31 vehicles and 80 infantry and one aggressive, increasingly desperate commander were all still out there reorganizing, recalculating, pushing. But inside Firebase Keller in the dark, a 19-year-old who had been preparing for this specific morning for 8 days settled into her secondary position and began the next phase of something that had never really been about firepower at all. It had always been about the one thing that firepower couldn't buy: time. And she was not done giving it to them. 0501 hours. The shot came from inside the wire and nobody outside the base knew it. That was the thing that would take the enemy commander the longest to understand that the threat had moved, that the invisible operator who had been dismantling his column from a ridge in a snowstorm had relocated without his scouts detecting a single footprint, a single thermal trace, a single indication of movement. His scouts had swept the ridge position 6 minutes after Carter came back through the eastern wall access. They had found a shallow depression in the snow, a few compressed patches where weight had rested for a long time, and nothing else. No brass, no equipment, no trail leading anywhere. Their report had gone up the chain, or what remained of the chain, given that their communications were still running at a fraction of normal capacity, and Callahan could almost feel the commander's confusion from 3 kilometers out. Almost feel it the way you feel weather changing before it arrives. The pressure shift, the temperature drop, the particular quality of air that tells you something is about to be different. And then Carter fired. From the eastern observation window, at a range that was a fraction of what she'd been working at from the ridge, she put a round through the fuel coupling of the column's primary support vehicle, the one that carried reserve ammunition and had been sitting at the center of the column like a heart keeping everything else alive. She didn't destroy it. She didn't need to. She hit the coupling at the precise angle that caused a controlled leak rather than an explosion fuel bleeding into the snow, rather than igniting the vehicle becoming inoperable without becoming a fireball that might actually motivate the enemy infantry rather than stop them. The effect on the column was immediate and total. Every vehicle stopped. Again. For the second time in less than an hour, 31 armored vehicles executing a combat advance came to a full halt because something had happened that their commander couldn't explain, couldn't locate, and couldn't counter with any of the tools he had available. And this time the halt had a different quality to it. Callahan could read it on the thermal monitor. The signatures weren't regrouping with purpose. They were stationary with uncertainty. There's a difference and it's visible even through the noise of a thermal image at distance. Purpose looks organized. Uncertainty looks like people standing still and looking at each other. Base. Carter's voice was different from inside the base than it had been over the radio from the ridge. Closer, more present. It had a physical quality. Now he could hear her actual voice alongside the radio transmission, a half-second echo. Their support vehicle is down. They've lost their ammunition reserve mobility. They can still use what's in individual vehicle loadouts, but they cannot resupply during this engagement without that vehicle. A pause. Their commander just lost his ability to sustain a prolonged assault. He knows it. Callahan keyed the radio, then stopped, then just turned and looked at her because she was right there 12 feet away. What does he do when he knows it? He said out loud without the radio. She didn't look up from her position at the window. He has 3 options, she said in the same voice she used on the radio, the one that processed information the way a computer processes code without friction, without hesitation. He commits everything immediately, all-out assault, trying to overwhelm the position before his logistics situation gets worse. He pulls back to reorganize and wait for resupply. Or, she paused and the pause was different from her other pauses. Or he does something he hasn't done yet in this engagement. What's that? Callahan asked. He asked for help, she said. Outside support, air or artillery from a rear element we haven't accounted for. The room went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Weston said very carefully, "We didn't account for a rear element." "I didn't account for it as a probability," Carter said. "I accounted for it as a possibility. There's a difference." She finally looked up from the window and her eyes found Callahan directly. "There's a relay station 14 kilometers northeast. If he contacts it, he can bring in support within 40 minutes. We need to know if he's trying to reach it." She held out her hand, palm up. "Give me your best radio operator." "That's Reyes," Callahan said. Reyes looked startled for exactly 1 second. The natural human response to being handed a responsibility you hadn't seen coming, then nodded and moved toward Carter. She spoke quietly and quickly, giving Reyes a specific set of frequencies and signal patterns to monitor, explaining what an emergency relay request looked like in their communications doctrine, how to distinguish it from standard traffic. Reyes listened with the focused, slightly overwhelmed expression of a man trying to catch every word of something important, and Callahan watched him catch every word because Reyes was 23 years old and had reflexes, and fear was making him better. "If you hear that pattern," Carter said, finishing, "you tell me immediately. Not Sergeant Callahan first. Me first. Every second matters." "Copy," Reyes said. She turned back to the window. 0518 hours. For the next 9 minutes, Firebase Keller operated in a state of suspended tension that Callahan would later describe as the loudest silence he'd ever lived through. Carter at the window, still and patient. Reyes at the radio bank, headphones on scanning. Weston cycling the decoys on a rotation that Carter had specified, not the original pattern, a new one, designed to make the enemy think the base's personnel were repositioning for a defensive stand rather than doing what they were actually doing, which was waiting for one woman to tell them what came next. Martinez keeping the generator alive through what he had started calling pure spite in personal relationship. Okafor moving between the medical prep area and the observation positions with the quiet, steady competence of someone who understood that her job was to be ready before she was needed. The enemy column sat, reorganized slowly, The southwest element, reduced to 6 vehicles by the earlier deception, had pulled back to a holding position when the support vehicle went down. Apparently, the commander didn't want to commit his flanking force without knowing whether he could sustain them. Good, Callahan thought. Every vehicle that isn't moving is a vehicle I don't have to fight. Sergeant, Reyes's voice sharp and immediate. I'm hearing something on the relay frequency. He pressed the headphone tighter. It's not the exact pattern she described, but it's similar. It's like a compressed version of it. Carter was at his side in 2 seconds. She took one headphone, pressed it against her ear, listened for exactly 5 seconds, and handed it back. He's not calling for air support, she said. He's calling for a tactical consultant, someone senior probably at the regional command level who can advise on the situation. She looked at Callahan. He's confused enough that he's asking for help understanding what he's facing. Callahan processed this. That's good. It's very good, she said. It also means we have a hard window. When the consultant connects and they compare notes, the consultant is going to see the engagement pattern and potentially recognize it for what it is. Regional command may have encountered this type of operational signature before. She paused and something moved across her face, something personal and brief, that she pulled back before it became readable. If they recognize it, they'll advise him differently than if they don't. They'll tell him this isn't a standard defensive force. They'll tell him what he might actually be facing, and then his calculus changes. How long before the consultant connects, Callahan asked. On their relay infrastructure with current atmospheric interference, 12 to 18 minutes. Then we have 12 minutes to make him make a decision before he gets advice, Callahan said. Yes, Carter said, and I know exactly what decision I want him to make. She went back to the window. Callahan followed her. He stood beside her, not crowding her position, just close enough to talk without projecting across the room. Talk to me, he said quietly. She didn't look at him. She was scanning through the rangefinder, checking the column's current positioning, recalculating in real time. His infantry is still committed to the ravine approach, she said. They're about 60% through, which means they're at the hardest section. The terrain narrows. The obstacles Reyes staged are concentrated in that zone. They're slow and they're frustrated and they're cold. Their sergeant-level leadership has been making noise on their communications. I can read it in the pattern of their movement, lots of stopping and clustering, which is what happens when ground-level leaders are debating rather than executing. Morale is cracking, Callahan said. Morale was always going to crack, she said. The cold, the terrain, the confusion from command, those are multiplicative, not additive. Each one makes the others worse. An infantry soldier who is cold and confused and being given contradictory orders will stop being aggressive and start being self-preserving. That's not cowardice, that's human. She lowered the rangefinder fractionally. I've been counting on it since day one. He looked at her profile. The ice was gone from her gear now. The warmth of the interior had melted. It left dark, wet patches across the ghillie material. Her face was still pale from the cold, but the color was coming back slowly, the way blood returns to numbed extremities. She still hadn't asked for food. Water heat. He was going to address that the moment she gave him half a window. What do you need from the team in the next 12 minutes, he asked. Full decoy rotation on all 4 faces simultaneously, she said. I know what that does to Martinez's generator. It needs to happen anyway for exactly 8 minutes. After 8 minutes, I need a complete power down on everything except the radio and my position's light. Total darkness, no heat signatures from your people for 3 minutes. He stared at her. 3 minutes with no thermal signatures from personnel. Your people will be inside in the building interior away from windows. The building itself will still show ambient heat from structural retention, but no moving human signatures on any face. She finally looked at him directly. Their commander is going to do a full thermal sweep of your perimeter in approximately 10 minutes. I know this because it's what I would do in his position when everything else has failed. You try to count your enemy. You try to see how many you're actually dealing with. If he sweeps and sees 10 human signatures actively moving around the perimeter, he commits to the assault because he's calculated that 10 people can't hold against what he has. She held his eyes. If he sweeps and sees nothing, he thinks your people are inside consolidated, which reads as either a full defensive withdrawal or a trap. Either reading makes him hesitate. And hesitation is what we need, Callahan said. Hesitation is everything, she said. Every minute he hesitates is a minute closer to the 72-hour window. Every minute is a minute I can use. 0531 hours. Callahan gave the order. Full four-phase decoy rotation, all emitters running simultaneously. The generator immediately began registering the load spike Martinez had warned about. And Martinez's voice came through the interior comms with a tone that was professional concern expressed through barely suppressed anguish. Sergeant, she's at 92% load. I've got maybe 11 minutes before I start seeing bypass failure. 8 minutes, Callahan said. Then I'm pulling everything down. You have 8 minutes. 8 minutes, Martinez repeated in the tone of a man making a promise to a machine he was not sure could keep it. On the thermal monitor, the enemy column's reaction to the full four-face emitter display was immediate and readable. The vehicle signatures shifted, turned essentially the way a crowd turns when it hears something from a new direction. Sensors sweeping, command element active. The compressed communication on the relay frequency spiked, which Reyes reported in real time, narrating what he was hearing in the low, focused voice of someone who was performing well under pressure and knew it and was not going to waste energy being surprised by that. They're reporting multiple defensive positions on all four faces, Reyes said. Their command is asking for a count. They're trying to figure out how many we are, Carter said from the window. She hadn't moved. Good, let them try. What's their count going to tell them? Weston asked. It's going to tell them we have more people than we do, Carter said. Thermal emitters don't read the same as human signatures to a trained thermal analyst. There are subtle differences in heat dispersion pattern, in movement predictability, but at this range in this storm with their sensor capability degraded, she paused. They're going to see what we want them to see. 7 minutes into the full rotation, the generator coughed. It was a single hard cough, the sound of machinery being pushed past where it wanted to go, and every person in the room heard it and felt it the way you feel a structural sound in a building somewhere in your chest before your brain processes it. Martinez, Callahan said. I hear it, Martinez said, and his voice was tight. I hear it, I'm managing it, don't talk to me for 60 seconds. 60 seconds. Nobody talked. Weston had his hand on the decoy control panel, he ready to cut it on Callahan's word. Reyes had one hand on his headphones and one on the relay radio, tracking both feeds simultaneously. Okafor stood in the doorway between the operations room and the medical prep area, positioned where she could move in either direction in under 2 seconds. Carter stayed completely still at the window. The generator coughed again, caught, steadied. She's holding, Martinez said. And the relief in his voice was not the relief of a technician reporting a metric. It was personal. It was the relief of a man whose relationship with a piece of machinery was real enough that its survival felt like a shared victory. 8 minutes, Callahan said. Cut everything, all of it, everyone interior away from windows right now. The decoys went dark. The external monitors went to standby. The lights in the operations room dropped to the single red combat lamp that ran on a separate low-draw circuit. 10 soldiers moved to the interior positions Carter had specified. 3 minutes, no human thermal signatures on any face of the building. Reyes, Carter said from the window. She was the only person not in an interior position because she had a specific exemption from her own plan. What's the relay frequency doing? Quiet, Reyes said. They stopped transmitting about 40 seconds ago. They're running the sweep, she said. Right now, they're looking at your perimeter and seeing nothing. A pause. Good. Stay still, everyone. 3 minutes. 3 minutes is a very long time when you're sitting in the dark in negative temperatures, waiting for an enemy commander to make a decision based on information you've deliberately given him. Callahan knew this intellectually. He had always known that time was subjective, that danger made it elastic, that the same 60 seconds could feel like 10 or feel like 200 depending on what was riding on them. These 3 minutes felt like a different category of time entirely. At minute 2, Reyes said very quietly, the relay frequency just lit up. They're transmitting again. What are they saying? Carter asked. Reyes listened. His expression shifted. Something moved through it, something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite alarm. Their command element is reporting to the rear echelon that they have encountered an unknown defensive configuration, that the position is, he's saying the position is more fortified than initial intelligence indicated. Reyes looked up. He's asking for a postponement of the assault timeline pending updated reconnaissance. The room absorbed this. Postponement. The commander, who had never pulled back in his operational history, was asking for more time before he committed to an assault on a base defended by 10 people and one woman at a window. Weston said, and his voice was the quietest it had been all morning, "He doesn't know what he's fighting." "No," Carter said, "he doesn't. And that's the most powerful weapon I have." 0549 hours. 3 minutes ended. Callahan brought the low-draw systems back online incrementally. Not the decoys, not the full thermal array, just the monitoring equipment in the radio and enough light to function. The generator hummed at a lower register, Martinez having used the 3-minute dark window to bring it back from 92 to 78% load, which was not comfortable but was sustainable. Carter turned from the window for the first time in 40 minutes. She stood up slowly and Callahan watched her do it, watched the controlled way she managed the stiffness of a body that had been in a sustained, fixed position in extreme cold for hours, the way she didn't show it on her face, even though it was in every careful movement. "Sit down," Callahan said, and it came out with more authority than he intended, which meant it came out like an order, and he wasn't sure that was wrong. She looked at him for a moment with those eyes that calculated everything. Then she sat on the floor against the wall beside the window, because that was where she had been and where she needed to be, and sitting on the floor against the wall was not weakness. It was the most efficient use of available rest time. Okafor was there in 10 seconds with water and one of the better MREs, the chicken and rice, which was everyone's first choice and which Okafor had been guarding since the resupply. She held them out without comment because Okafor understood that some people needed to be cared for without ceremony. Carter took the water, drank, took the MRE, looked at it, then looked at Okafor. "Thank you," she said, 2 words. Quiet. But the weight in them was significant in the way that things are significant when they come from people who don't say unnecessary things. "You've been out there since before 3, Okafor said. Not accusatory, just present, just honest. "Yes," Carter said. "When did you last eat?" A pause. "Yesterday." Okafor's jaw tightened in the specific way of a medic hearing a patient report something inadvisable. "Eat," she said, "right now before anything else." Carter ate unarticulate. She ate with the same efficient focus she applied to everything, not savoring it, but not wasting it processing fuel. While she ate, she talked between bites without stopping because there was still work to do and hunger didn't change that. "Their commander has bought himself time by requesting the postponement," she said. "But his rear echelon is not going to grant an extended delay. The strategic objective of this corridor is time-sensitive. They're going to push him to execute within the next 90 minutes, regardless of his reconnaissance concerns." She took another bite, chewed, continued, "Which means we have approximately 80 minutes before he commits fully to the assault. In those 80 minutes, I need to complete 2 more actions that will change the nature of that assault fundamentally." "What 2 actions?" Callahan asked. "First, their southwest element. 6 vehicles still in holding position. Their fuel situation is already stressed because they were running full heat against the storm for hours. 2 of those 6 vehicles are showing reduced thermal output from their engines. They're cold soaking. If they stay in that holding position for another 40 minutes without running their engines at full power, 2 of them will have mobility problems when they try to advance." She set down the MRE for a moment. "I'm going to encourage them to stay in that position." "How sharing?" "By making the southwest approach look more dangerous than it is," she said. "I need Weston to build a new decoy configuration on the southwest face, not human signatures, something different. I need it to look like prepared fighting positions. Static emitters placed at fighting position intervals ground level, the heat signature of equipment rather than people." She looked at Weston. "Can you do that with what we have left?" Weston thought for exactly 2 seconds. "Yes," he said. "Second action," Carter continued. "They're infantry in the ravine. They've been in that terrain for nearly 2 hours. At this temperature, at this level of physical exertion, their leadership is dealing with cold casualties, people who are not wounded, but are no longer fully combat effective. I estimate between 8 and 12 of their 80 infantry are in that category already." She picked up the MRE again. "If I take one more shot into the ravine, not at people at the terrain, at a specific choke point in the rock formation, where Reyes staged the heaviest obstacles, the sound and concussion in that enclosed space will be significant. It will not harm anyone. but it will tell their leadership that the ravine approach is being actively defended, which they currently suspect, but haven't confirmed. When you tell soldiers in their condition that the path they're on is being watched and targeted, the most cold affected among them stop moving. And when some stop, it's harder for others to keep going. Reyes looked at her with an expression that was equal parts professional admiration and something more human, something that recognized what it meant that she was thinking about not harming the infantry in the ravine. Even now, even in the middle of an engagement where harming them would have been entirely justified. "You're trying to give their commander a way out," Reyes said. "You're making it cost too much without making it impossible." Carter looked at him directly. "Yes," she said, "exactly that. 0604 hours. Weston built the Southwest fighting position configuration in 11 minutes. Carter looked at it on the external monitor, made 2 adjustment requests on the 3rd emitter height on the 5th, and then confirmed it. The Southwest Elements vehicles stayed exactly where they were. 2 of them were already showing the engine thermal reduction she'd predicted. Then she fired into the ravine. The concussion of the shot inside the stone formation carried in a way that the open ridge never could have produced. Callahan heard it from inside, the base felt it, the way you feel thunder when it's close. On the thermal monitor, the ravine's infantry signatures stopped moving for 40 seconds. 40 full seconds of complete stillness, which was a very long time for 80 infantry in hostile terrain in the middle of an assault. When they started moving again, they were moving slower. And 3 of them, 3 signatures at the back of the ravine cluster, had stopped moving toward the base. They were moving laterally, sideways, finding shelter, 3 people who were no longer coming. Their leadership just called the rear echelon. Reyes said, headphones pressed tight. They're reporting the ravine approach is under direct observation and fire. They're requesting permission to withdraw the advance element. The room went very still. A request to withdraw the advance element coming from the infantry leadership in the ravine, going up to the rear echelon at the same time the armored commander was requesting a postponement, 2 separate elements of the same force in the same engagement independently asking to stop. Callahan looked at Carter. She was finishing the last of the MRE methodical to the last byte, and she was looking at the wall above the window with the expression of a person running final calculations. "They're not going to get permission to withdraw," she said. "The rear echelon will deny it, but the fact that they asked, it tells me something important." She looked at him. "Their unit cohesion is fracturing. Not broken fracturing, there's a difference. A broken unit routes. A fracturing unit becomes unpredictable. Individual leaders start making individual decisions, and individual decisions are easier to manage," Callahan said, finishing her own sentence back to her. She looked at him for a moment. Something moved across her face, quick and genuine, the fastest and realest thing he'd seen from her, and it might have been the beginning of a smile, or it might have been something closer to recognition. The specific recognition of a person realizing that someone else has been paying that close of attention. "Yes," she said, "exactly. 0619 hours. The rear echelon denied the withdrawal request. The armored commander received orders to execute the assault in 60 minutes. Reyes translated the relay traffic in real time, his voice steady and precise, and when he was done, the room held the information the way a room holds a verdict. 60 minutes. Callahan looked at the thermal monitor, at the column, still reorganizing, still running, below full effectiveness, still facing a base it didn't understand, commanded by a man who was about to be ordered to attack anyway. He looked at his team, exhausted, cold running on commitment and caffeine, and the specific determination of people who have been through enough hours of sustained threat that they've stopped feeling like they might survive and started simply doing the job regardless. He looked at Carter. She was already back at the window. 60 minutes, he said. 58 now, she said. I've been counting. A pause. There's one more thing I need to tell you, Sergeant. Something in her voice made him walk across the room and stand beside her. He didn't ask. He waited. She spoke without looking at him, her voice low enough that only he could hear. The rear echelon that just denied the withdrawal request and ordered the assault, they're going to send an observer. Someone to oversee the assault and report directly on why it's been stalled this long. She paused. That observer is going to be flying in on a light reconnaissance drone. It'll reach the engagement area in approximately 40 minutes. He processed this. A drone. Yes. It'll have sensor capability. Better than anything the column has on the ground, she said. It'll sweep the area. If it sweeps the area, it has a non-trivial probability of locating a shooter inside a building at this range, even through atmospheric interference. She was quiet for a moment. It changes my position situation significantly. Do you need to move again, he asked. No, she said. I need to not be visible from above when it arrives. She finally turned and looked at him, and her eyes were clear and steady and fully present. And I need to take one final exterior shot before it gets here, because after it arrives, I'll be limited to what I can do from a completely covered interior position. A pause. I need to change the terminal calculus for that column in the next 35 minutes. Whatever I do after that will be constrained. What do you need? She told him. And Callahan listened, and then he turned to his team, and he said the words that gathered them around him in the red-lit operations room with the generator humming and the storm still pressing and 60 minutes on the clock. Last phase, he said. Carter's going to give us the morning. Our job is to give her everything she needs to do it. No hesitation, no improvisation, no individual decisions. We are one unit. We move together. He looked at each of them in turn. Weston, Reyes, Martinez, Okafor, the others, and saw in every face the same thing, not fearlessness, something better than fearlessness. The decision to act despite fear, which was the only real form of courage that had ever counted for anything. On Carter's signal, he said, and every one of them, without another word, moved to their position. The clock was running. The drone was coming, and Emily Carter was already calculating the shot that was going to change everything before it arrived. 0627 hours. 35 minutes before the drone arrived. Carter was already back at the window still and settled her breathing in the long, slow rhythm that Callahan had come to recognize as her operational state, the place she went when the rest of the world became calculation and the calculation became everything. He had watched enough soldiers under pressure to know the different ways fear expressed itself in the body. Some people got louder, some got quieter, some got rigid. Some shook in small, invisible ways that they couldn't control, no matter how hard they tried. Carter got still. Not the stillness of suppression, not someone white-knuckling their fear into silence. The stillness of a person who had been in this specific interior space so many times that it had become natural. The stillness of someone who had grown up in it, been shaped by, it had made it the place they lived rather than the place they retreated to. He thought about her father again. He thought about the worn logbook with the cracked spine. He thought about what it meant to learn something so completely from someone you loved that it became part of how you existed in the world. And he thought about what it meant to exceed them, whether that was something you felt as triumph or as grief or as both simultaneously tangled so tightly you couldn't separate them. He didn't ask. There wasn't time, and some things weren't his to ask. Talk me through it, he said, standing beside her. What you're about to do, all of it. She was quiet for 3 seconds, which was long for her. Then their commander received his orders 40 minutes ago. He's been reorganizing for assault ever since. His primary approach is still blocked by the disabled lead vehicle. They've been trying to clear it, but the weight and the terrain are working against them. They'll have it clear in approximately 15 minutes. She adjusted her position, fractionally resettling. His southwest element is down to 4 effective vehicles. The 2 cold-soaked ones are non-mobile without a 30-minute warm-up that he doesn't have time for. So his assault force is effectively the center column minus the support vehicle plus 4 southwest vehicles trying to find a viable angle. And the infantry in the ravine. 63 effective, she said. The rest have self-evacuated or are stationary from cold. 63 is still significant, but 63 infantry who have been in difficult terrain for 2 hours in negative temperatures, who have been told their approach is actively targeted, who have watched their armor lose mobility 3 times, those 63 infantry are not the same force that started this engagement. Morale, Callahan said. Morale, physiology, and trust, she said. They don't trust their commander's picture of what they're facing. Ground-level soldiers always know when command doesn't have good information. They feel it in how the orders change and how the timeline keeps shifting, in the fact that they've been in a ravine for 2 hours without a clear go signal. She paused. They're still dangerous. Don't mistake this for over. But they are substantially different from what they were at the beginning of this engagement. What's the shot? Callahan asked. The one you need to take in the next 35 minutes. She was quiet again. This was a different quiet, not calculating, not assessing, something more considered. Their commander, she said, not him personally, his command vehicle. A pause. It's been repositioned to the secondary staging area about 200 meters back from the primary column. That's where he relocated after I took out his lead element. He thinks the distance makes him safer. She lowered her voice slightly, not from secrecy, but from the specific register of a person saying something that carries weight. If I take his command vehicle's communications array, the backup unit he's been running on since I took the primary, he loses direct contact with his assault elements during the attack. He can still see them on thermal. He can still use runners. But coordinated simultaneous multi-axis assault becomes extremely difficult without real-time communications. A pause. And a difficult assault against a position he doesn't understand with degraded unit cohesion in this terrain, in this weather that assault stalls. And a stalled assault, given the logistics situation we've created, does not recover quickly. Callahan worked through it. You're not ending the threat. You are making it collapse under its own weight. The threat was always going to end one of two ways, she said. Either they overwhelm us through attrition, or the cost of continuing becomes higher than the cost of stopping. I've been working on the second outcome since before I arrived. She looked at him, and there was something direct and unguarded in it that he hadn't seen from her in the hours they'd been working together, a glimpse of the person behind the operator. I can't destroy a column, Sergeant. I'm one person with a rifle and a calculator, but I can make the decision to continue feel impossible. And that's enough. That has always been enough if you start early enough and you don't stop. 0639 hours. Martinez, Callahan said into the interior comms, I need a clean power cycle in 4 minutes. Full cycle down and up 5 seconds. Cleaner than the last one. Cleaner, Martinez said. You mean like the generator doesn't sound like it's dying in the process? Exactly like that. A pause filled with the sound of a man doing rapid mental engineering. I can do it in 6 seconds. 5 is asking for a relationship the generator and I haven't built yet today. 6 seconds, Callahan said. 4 minutes. Copy. He turned to Weston. Southwest decoys, I need you to shift 2 of the fighting position emitters to show movement, not human movement. Equipment repositioning, like they're relocating a crew-served weapon. Weston absorbed this. She wants the Southwest element to think we're redeploying firepower toward them. She wants their commander to think we're redeploying firepower toward them, Callahan said. Make it look deliberate, not rushed. The way professionals move equipment, not the way scared people do. Weston was already moving. Reyes, Callahan said, relay frequency the moment you hear any transmission that sounds like assault coordination, you tell me before you finish hearing it. Don't wait for it to be complete. Understood, Reyes said. He had his headphones on and his hand on the radio, and the look of a young soldier who had been through 4 hours of sustained pressure and had discovered in that process that he was more capable than he'd previously believed. It was written in his posture, something had changed in how he held himself. The pressure had compressed him, and then he had not broken, and now he was standing differently. Callahan recognized it. He'd seen it happen to soldiers before. It was one of the things about this job that was worth the cost of the other things. Okafor appeared from the medical prep area. No casualties, she said. We've been in this for hours and no casualties. She said it not like a celebration Okafor was too practical for premature celebration, but like a data point, a remarkable data point that she needed to say out loud to make sure everyone registered it. She keeps the fight away from us, Weston said from across the room, not pausing in what he was doing. Every shot she takes is a shot they don't take at us. Every vehicle she stops is a vehicle that doesn't reach this wall. She's been fighting her own engagement, Reyes said, this whole time. Parallel to ours. We've been doing our thing and she's been doing something completely different, and it's been protecting us. Callahan didn't add to it. They were right and they knew it, and saying more would have diluted it. Sometimes the truth was better left in the room at exactly the volume it arrived. At the window, Carter said without turning, 4 minutes, Sergeant. I know, he said. 0643 hours. The power cycle ran at 6 seconds clean and controlled the generator coming down and coming back up with a smoothness that Martinez had apparently achieved through personal negotiation with the machine in the intervening minutes. On the thermal monitor, the enemy's sensor sweep, which had been running its passive cycle, showed the expected response attention pulled to the base's power fluctuation. Sensors dwelling on Firebase Keller for approximately 12 seconds before sweeping back outward. 12 seconds. In 12 seconds, Carter fired. The sound inside the base was different from what Callahan expected, sharper, compressed by the walls and the window geometry, a crack that hit his chest and was gone before he fully registered it. He grabbed the thermal monitor. He watched. The command vehicle's backup communications array, a small high-mounted antenna cluster that had been the enemy commander's lifeline to his assault elements for the past 2 hours, went dark. Not dramatically, not explosively. It simply stopped being a heat source the way electronics stop when they are no longer functioning, the heat dissipating in the cold in a way that was almost gentle. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the enemy column moved, not toward them sideways. Lateral movement across the staging area, vehicles turning, repositioning the specific agitated movement of an organized force that has just lost its nerve center. The infantry elements in the ravine who had been staging for the assault push stopped receiving coordinated signals and began doing exactly what Carter had predicted. Individual leaders making individual decisions, some pushing forward, some consolidating. The clean edge of a coordinated assault dissolving into something ragged and uncertain. "Reyes," Carter said from the window. "I hear it," Reyes said, his voice tight. Their relay traffic just exploded. The assault elements are calling for command coordination and not getting it. Their commander is trying to reach his vehicle's backup comms, and it's not responding. He's switching to a runner system. Reyes looked up with wide eyes. He's using runners. In this terrain, in this storm. Runners, physical human messengers carrying orders between elements. Because the electronic communications were gone, it was not impossible. But in this terrain, in this weather, with this level of unit fracture, runners meant delays. Runners meant orders that arrived modified by the journey, changed by the cold and the distance and the individual interpretation of the person carrying them. Runners meant an assault that would happen in pieces rather than as a coordinated whole. And a piecemeal assault against a prepared position, even a position as undermanned as Firebase Keller, was an assault that could be defended. Callahan pressed the interior comms. "Martinez, how are we doing?" "Generator is at 68%, Martinez said, and the relief in his voice was audible. The relief of a man who had been holding something together by force of will and could now feel it actually stabilizing. "She's stable. She's running clean." "Outstanding," Callahan said. He looked at Carter. She had pulled back from the window and was sitting against the wall again, the rifle across her knees, the rangefinder in her hands, scanning the monitor feeds that Reyes was relaying to a secondary screen near her position. Her face was calm, not relieved calm. There was a distinction, and it mattered. "Talk to me about the drone," he said. 17 minutes out, she said. "Based on their relay traffic when they dispatched it, it's a medium-range reconnaissance platform. It'll do a wide area sweep first, then narrow. It'll be looking for the source of the engagement disruption." She set down the rangefinder. "When it arrives, I cannot be visible. Any thermal signature from this window position will be detectable by its sensor package at close range." She paused. "I need to move to the interior shooting position. I identified it when I came back inside the northeast corner of the supply room. There's a 40-centimeter gap between the structural panels where the seam didn't fully seal in the cold. From that position, I have a limited but functional angle on the primary approach." "Limited how?" "I lose the southwest track entirely," she said. "And my range is reduced. Anything past 800 meters is outside effective precision work through a 40-centimeter gap in bad light." She met his eyes. "But I can still see the primary approach. And if their assault push comes through there, which it will because their southwest element is immobilized and their infantry is fragmented, I can still influence it." "Influence it how from that position?" She was quiet for a moment. "Their assault, if it comes now, will be disorganized. No coordinated communications, piecemeal infantry, reduced armor. What they need to push through that disorganization is momentum. If the first element through the primary approach stalls, if I can stop the LAD vehicle again, or disable the next command-capable unit that tries to fill the vacuum from the first." She stopped, restarted. "The soldiers behind a stalled lead do not maintain momentum in this terrain. They bunch up, they wait, They look to each other for information that nobody has. And when a disorganized force without communication stalls at its lead element in difficult terrain, it stops, Callahan said. Not because they can't go forward, because nobody is sure they're supposed to. Yes, she said. Exactly that. Weston made a sound from across the room, not a word more of an exhale, the sound of a man comprehending something. She's been building this the entire time, he said. Every shot, every decoy, redirect, every communications hit, it's all been building to a force that, when it finally tries to assault, doesn't have the cohesion to follow through. 8 days of planning, Reyes said. She planned it before she got here. No, Carter said quietly. I planned the framework. The specifics adapted. That's what planning actually is. You build a structure that can hold when the details change. You don't plan the outcome. You plan your capacity to respond to whatever the outcome tries to be. The room held that. Nobody added to it because it was complete. 0658 hours, 16 minutes before the drone. Carter moved to the supply room. She moved quickly and quietly, the case in one hand, the rangefinder in the other, and she disappeared through the interior door. Without ceremony, the way she did everything without announcement, without requiring acknowledgement, simply moving from one necessary place to the next. Callahan followed her to the doorway. He watched her find the seam in the northeast corner, the gap between panels that she had identified the moment she came back inside, that she had filed away without comment while everything else was happening, and settle into position in front of it. She checked the angle, made a fractional adjustment, checked again. Good, he asked. Functional, she said. She didn't say good because from this position with a 40-centimeter gap and reduced range and a drone incoming, good was not the honest word. Functional was. And she was always the honest word. He went back to the operations room. The thermal monitor showed the enemy column in a state he hadn't seen it in before, not organized, not regrouping, but genuinely suspended. The assault elements had moved to their start positions based on orders that had been transmitted before the communications went down, but they weren't executing. They were waiting for the coordination signal that wasn't coming. The runners were in the field. He could see the individual infantry signatures moving between elements, but runners move at foot speed, and foot speed in this terrain, in this weather, was glacial. Reyes, he said, their commander just appeared outside the command vehicle on foot. Reyes said, tracking the relay traffic in the thermal feed simultaneously. He's trying to physically reach his assault element leaders. He's Sergeant, he is walking through his column in a snowstorm, trying to give orders in person. Callahan absorbed the image of that. A colonel commanding a 31-vehicle column with 80 infantry reduced to walking between his vehicles in a blizzard to communicate because a 19-year-old had systematically removed every electronic option he had. He's still going to push, Callahan said. It wasn't a question. He's still going to push, Reyes confirmed. He has his orders. He's walking to the front of the column right now. He's going to lead from the front, Weston said from the decoy controls. That's either very brave or very desperate. Usually both, Callahan said, which is what makes it dangerous. A commander willing to lead from the front in these conditions is a commander who's going to get his people moving through willpower alone. He pressed the interior comms. Carter, their commander, is on foot moving to lead the assault element personally. He'll have his armor behind him in approximately 8 minutes. Her voice came back through the comms from the supply room, clear and close. I see him on the thermal feed Reyes is routing to me. A pause. He's brave, I want to note that. He's doing what he believes he has to do. Nobody responded to that because it was a complicated thing to respond to, acknowledging the courage of the man who was trying to destroy them. And Carter had said it simply and straightforwardly because that was how she said things, and it landed in the room and sat there. He's also walking into something he still doesn't understand, she said, and that's going to matter. 0706 hours, 10 minutes before the drone. The primary approach cleared. The disabled lead vehicle had been pushed aside by the armor behind it. They'd found the angle and the combined force and gotten it off the road. Callahan watched the thermal monitor as the column's lead elements began moving again, cautious and bunched slower than before, the disorganization visible, even through thermal imaging at distance. Their commander was out front, walking, physically leading the advance. Base. Carter's voice through the comms, quiet and controlled. Lead armor is moving. I have a firing solution on the second vehicle in column, not the lead. The second. Why the second? Callahan asked. Because their commander is on foot ahead of the lead vehicle, she said. If I stop the lead vehicle, he's between it and whatever comes from the front. He physically cannot be hurt by it, but he's trapped pinned between his own armor and the blocked approach, and his options become zero. A pause. And a commander with zero options stops giving orders. And when a disorganized force stops receiving orders from its leader, simultaneously, it stops moving. Not because it's defeated, because it has no instruction. And a force without instruction in this terrain, in this weather, with this level of accumulated confusion, stays stopped, Callahan said. Stays stopped, she confirmed. I need your decoys running on all active faces simultaneously for this. I need their sensors seeing maximum activity from the base at the moment of the shot. I want their attention fragmented in every direction. Can Martinez give me 90 seconds of full load? Martinez, Callahan said into the comms. I heard her, Martinez said. I've been listening this whole time. Don't ask me if I can do it. Just tell me when. On Carter's mark, Callahan said. On Carter's mark, Martinez said. She says when I run everything we've got. 0711 hours, 9 minutes before the drone. Callahan stood in the operations room with his hands on the table and looked at the thermal monitor and felt time doing the elastic thing again. Stretching, thinning, becoming a different substance than it was during normal hours of normal days. He had been awake for over 20 hours. His team had been running on fear and commitment and bad coffee since before midnight. The generator was at 68% and holding. The enemy commander was on foot in a snowstorm leading a disorganized column through terrain he didn't understand toward a base he fundamentally misread. And in the supply room, Emily Carter was at a 40-centimeter gap in a wall panel with a rifle across her knees and 8 days of preparation in her hands. He thought about what Weston had said. She's been fighting her own engagement this whole time. He thought about the first moment he'd seen her, the bunk room, the black case position for one-handed access facing the wall, eating alone. The notebook, the barometric pressure calculations at the eastern wall in the storm. Far enough that it matters, she'd said, and he'd had no way to know yet what she meant by far enough, what the real measure of that distance was, not just in meters, but in everything else, in preparation, in patience, in the particular kind of courage that didn't announce itself or need to. Carter, he said into the comms. Sergeant, her voice. Whatever happens in the next 9 minutes, whatever happens at after, I want you to know something. A pause, longer than her other pauses. The length of a person who is not used to being spoken to personally in the middle of operational work and is recalibrating for it. Tell me after, she said. There'll be time after. He almost said there might not be. He didn't say it because she knew that better than he did and because she'd chosen after anyway, which meant she believed in after, which meant he was going to as well. After, he said. Mark, she said. And then immediately, without pause, Martinez, now. The generator roared. Not the labored coughing roar of a machine being pushed past its comfort. The full committed roar of something that had been maintained and managed and treated with respect and was now performing at its absolute maximum because the person running it had spent 4 hours building toward this moment. Every decoy on every face of the base activated simultaneously. The thermal output of Firebase Keller bloomed on every enemy sensor in the engagement area, a sudden, dramatic expansion of heat signatures and activity that read as a base going to full defensive alert. Every enemy sensor turned toward it. Every operator reading those sensors focused on the base. The shot came from inside from a 40-centimeter gap in a supply room wall panel, and nobody in the enemy column was looking in that direction. The second vehicle in the lead element stopped. Its drive system seized she'd hit the mechanical linkage between its engine and its track, drive a shot that required threading around through a gap in the vehicle's armor plating that was measured in centimeters at a range that was not what it should have been from that position, in conditions that were not what you designed precision shots for. It stopped completely. Sideways. The column behind it compressed vehicle after vehicle, breaking the accordion effect of armored units in column formation when the front stops unexpectedly. The lead vehicle, the one their commander was walking ahead of, found itself sandwiched between the stopped second vehicle behind it and open ground in front, which was exactly the geometric trap Carter had described. The whole front of the column was frozen in place, stacked behind a disabled vehicle, in terrain that didn't allow lateral movement, with a commander on foot between his lead armor and the objective, who was now standing still in the snow, looking at his column and having no radio with which to untangle it. 60 seconds passed, nothing moved. Reyes, Callahan said very quietly. Reyes had both hands pressed against his headphones. He was listening with the full intensity of someone at the edge of something, and when he spoke, his voice was low and strange, the voice of a person reporting something they hadn't fully processed yet. Their rear echelon is calling the assault elements. No response. They're calling again. Their commander is on the relay now. He's requesting a pause in the assault timeline. A pause. He's citing unresolved defensive threat in lateral exposure. He's saying he cannot confirm the nature of the opposition and he needs. Reyes stopped. Press the headphones tighter. He's requesting withdrawal to staging area pending reconnaissance and resupply. The room went absolutely still. Not the hell-breath stillness of people waiting for something. The exhaled stillness of people who have reached the other side of something. Their rear echelon is responding, Reyes said. His voice had changed something and it was shaking very slightly, not from fear, from the thing that comes after sustained fear when the pressure lifts and the body catches up to what it's been through. They're granting the pause, 45-minute pause pending drone reconnaissance assessment. He pulled the headphones off and looked at Callahan. Sergeant, they stopped. 0719 hours. The drone arrived 6 minutes later. It ran its sweep. It scanned the engagement area, the column's staging position, the approach routes, the base perimeter, the terrain in between. It was looking for the precision shooter who had dismantled a 31-vehicle column. It was looking for the external sniper position, the ridge hide, the elevated firing point. It did not find one, because Emily Carter was inside, in a supply room, at a 40-centimeter gap in a wall panel, motionless, her thermal signature indistinguishable from the ambient heat of the building's interior, her position invisible from above her presence, undetectable by any sensor the drone was running. The drone completed its sweep and reported back to the rear echelon, no external shooter located. No identifiable precision firing position on the surrounding terrain. Firebase Keller's defensive configuration inconsistent with a unit of this size and capability. Callahan read the report through Reyes's relay interpretation and sat with it for a moment. The rear echelon's conclusion based on the drone data was that they had insufficient intelligence to explain the engagement's outcome, which meant they also had insufficient intelligence to guarantee the next assault attempt would succeed, which meant the risk calculus had shifted. The column was ordered to full withdrawal to its staging area, 31 armored vehicles, 80 infantry, 63 effective, the rest already moving to the rear on their own. One commander walking back through his column in the snow, past the vehicles he'd counted on, past the infantry, he'd pushed into a ravine, past the disabled vehicles that marked every moment in this engagement, where one person's preparation had exceeded his own. He was walking back, and he still didn't know why. Carter came out of the supply room 40 seconds after Callahan told her the column was withdrawing. She walked into the operations room with the case in one hand and the notebook in the other, and she looked at the thermal monitor, at the signatures of the withdrawing column, moving away the long, slow recession of a threat that had been the entire horizon of this morning, and she watched it for exactly 10 seconds. Then she sat down in the chair beside the thermal monitor, set the case on the floor, and opened the notebook to a blank page. She wrote something, closed it. Callahan moved to stand beside her. He didn't look at the notebook. "What did you write?" he asked. She looked up at him, and the thing that he'd seen briefly in her face before the glimpse of the person behind the operator was fully present now. Not masked, not managed, just there in her eyes in the particular exhaustion and quiet of someone who had done the thing they'd been preparing to do and now had to figure out who they were in the absence of it. "What time it ended," she said. "I always write what time it ended." He looked at her for a moment. "You said there'd be time after." "Yes," she said. So he sat down in the chair beside her. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, the same posture he'd had 6 hours ago, staring at the thermal monitor in the math that didn't work. "Who are you, Emily Carter?" She was quiet for a long time. Around them, the base was coming back to life. Martinez doing something to the generator that sounded almost celebratory. Weston and Reyes at the wall. Okafor breaking down the trauma kit she'd never had to fully open, voices returning to their normal registers. The particular relief noise of people who have come through something and are still there to make noise about it. I'm a medic, she said, Carter. And other things. She looked down at the notebook. My father was a competitive long-range shooter, not military, civilian. He started teaching me when I was 6 because it was the thing he loved most, and he wanted to share it. A pause. He died when I was 16. I kept going because stopping felt like losing the last conversation we were still having. She was quiet for a moment. I enlisted at 17. I put medic on my paperwork because I wanted to help people. I put the other skills on a separate form that went to a separate office. She looked up at him. The separate office sent me here. Callahan held that. He held all of it, the 6-year-old learning trajectory and windrift from a father who loved her, the teenager who kept practicing because grief needed somewhere to go, the separate form that went to a separate office and ended up producing the morning they'd just survived. Your father, he said, would have said I used too many rounds, she said, and there was something in it, something warm and private and real. A whole relationship compressed into one sentence that made him understand in the space of a breath everything he needed to understand about who she was and where she'd come from. Around them, Reyes was laughing at something Weston said. Martinez was talking to the generator in what sounded like affectionate terms. Okafor was making coffee, real coffee, the good packet she'd been saving, because there were moments that required the good packet. Outside, the storm was easing, slowly. The way Rocky Mountain storms eased gradually, reluctantly, as if they had more to say and were choosing to save it. The temperature was still brutal. The approach routes were still blocked. The ravine still difficult, the southwestern track still covered in Weston's decoys. But the column was withdrawing. The signatures on the thermal monitor were moving in the right direction, away diminishing. The threat that had been the entire weight of this morning becoming smaller, and then a question of distance rather than imminence. 72 hours until reinforcements. They had made it to morning. Callahan looked at Emily Carter, at the notebook in her hands, at the case on the floor, at the face that was young and old at the same time in the specific way of people who carry things that are heavier than their years. And he said the thing he'd told her he'd say after. You gave us the morning, he said. One person, 8 days of preparation in one morning. You gave it to us. She looked at him steadily. You gave me what I needed to do it, she said. Your team, Martinez keeping the power on, Reyes on the relay, Weston building things that weren't real and making them convincing. Okafor keeping everyone functional. She shook her head slightly. I didn't give you the morning. We made it together and I was the part of it that happened to be invisible. He thought about that. He thought about all of it, the 10 soldiers who had moved to their positions without hesitation on her direction, who had run decoys and cut power and built false fighting positions and managed a failing generator and monitored relay frequencies and done every specific, quiet, unglamorous thing she had needed them to do exactly when she needed it, without independent deviation because they had trusted her. Because Callahan had told them to trust her, and they had trusted him, and she had trusted all of them enough to build a plan that required every one of them to work. One unit, moving together. He looked at the thermal monitor one more time. The column was 2 kilometers out and still moving away. The drone was gone. The morning light, pale thin, filtered through storm clouds that were finally beginning to break, was beginning to come in through the observation windows. Okafor, he called across the room. Sir, she said, is there enough of the good coffee for 2 cups? A pause. There's enough for 3 if Martinez stops hovering. Stop hovering, Martinez. I'm not hovering, I'm performing quality assurance. Stop hovering. Hovering discontinued, Martinez said and retreated to the generator room, which was where he was happiest anyway. Callahan looked at Carter. She was looking at the thermal monitor, at the diminishing signatures of the withdrawing column, with an expression that was tired and quiet, and fully present, the expression of someone who had given everything that was required and found at the end of it that they still had something left, that they were still there, that after was real. Coffee, and he said. She looked at him, and this time finally, fully without reservation, she smiled. It was a small smile, private and real, the kind that doesn't perform for anyone, the kind that belongs to the person who has it. Yes, she said, thank you. Outside, the storm broke. The Rockies emerged from the white in their full, massive, indifferent permanence, the ridges and faces and high ground that Emily Carter had surveyed and calculated and made into a weapon without firing a single round from them. The morning was there, cold and clear and certain. They had held the line, not with numbers, not with firepower, not with anything that would show up in a standard after-action report as a decisive military asset. They had held it with preparation and patience, in the absolute precision of one person who had spent her whole life getting ready for a morning she didn't know was coming in a place she hadn't been assigned for people she hadn't yet met, and who had shown up anyway with a locked black case and a worn notebook in the quiet, unshakable knowledge that far enough was exactly as far as it needed to be. That was the morning Firebase Keller survived. And that was the morning 10 soldiers learned what one person prepared and patient and committed could make possible, not by being extraordinary in the way stories usually told it out and dramatic and visible, but by being extraordinary in the way that actually worked, invisible, meticulous, and absolutely completely sure.